Hello and welcome to Episode 1 of the Cthulhu Death May Die painting series. Today we will be painting the series' namesake, Cthulhu. The purpose of this series is to provide hobbyists with a method of painting the figures for this board game quickly and well. I aim for a golden ratio of speed and quality, and I invite you to judge whether I hit the mark. With that out of the way, let's get to it. The first step on Cthulhu is to prep the mini for priming by removing the mold lines. I use a hobby knife, though one could use hard files or sanding twigs or sandpaper. The mold lines on Cthulhu are challenging to get to because his flesh is all ridges and bumps. Generally, I drag the side of the blade across the mold line repeatedly and gently until the line goes away. How long you spend on this step is up to you. If you can't remove the mold line entirely, just aim to break it up so it doesn't look like one continuous line. I intend to use contrast paints on this mini, so removing the mold lines is a must, as contrast paints and washes would make them stand out. Then, I wash the mini in warm soapy water to remove any leftover mold release agent that, if present, would prevent our primer from adhering properly to the mini. Wipe the mini off and allow it to dry before priming. I have chosen to prime this model with a combination of 3 Stynylrez primers through an airbrush. I'm doing this to achieve a contrasting undercoat or zenithal highlight that will remain visible when I paint the figure with transparent paints. This is a fast and easy way to get a lot of contrast on your figure, especially one that is large and doesn't have a lot of tiny details. The first and darkest primer I'm using is olive green. I'm applying this on the bottom of the figure to about 100 degrees or directly horizontal. Then I'm using neutral yellow from a roughly 45 degree angle over the miniature. Green and yellow are good starting tones for Cthulhu. Finally, I am brightening the head and neck and wings with white. I want the head to be the focal point of the mini, and this can be accomplished by making it the brightest point on the model. You could also use spray paint to prime your figure. With the right matte colors, you could even get a two-tone zenithal in green and yellow. The result would be a bit more spotty, and if you're not careful, the spray paint might obscure some detail, but it's totally doable. I'm applying a dry brush to further push the undercoated pre-highlights. I'm using Pro Acryl's Bright Ivory, getting some on my brush, wiping most of it off on a paper towel before gently dragging the bristles across the model. I'm using a makeup brush for this. One could also use a nasty old brush that they don't mind being ruined. Dry brushing will deposit paint on the raised areas of the model. In this case, it is highlighting all the ridges on the sucker-like features on Cthulhu's back. The first color, and arguably the first mistake I make on this model, is applying Plaguebearer Flesh on the head. Plaguebearer Flesh is a good color for Cthulhu's skin tone, but if I wanted the head to stand out, I should have mixed in a lighter color to further differentiate the head from the rest of the body. That said, the white undercoat will provide some lightening relative to the body. As I'm applying this, I'm being careful to avoid painting any of the tentacles, as those are going to be pink and purple. It is at this point that I recall there are many gaps on this figure that should be filled before painting. So I'm going in with some Vallejo matte varnish and brushing it into the gaps on the model. This will help those gaps appear less prominent. After that varnish dries, I'm moving back to our colors. I'm using contrast Volpus Pink for the top third of the mouth tentacles, and I'll be using Shyish Purple for the bottom third. And I'll be wet blending the two colors together in the middle third of the mass of tentacles. Unfortunately, this was all done off camera. My camera ran out of space after I got some of my colors down, and it's important to work quickly when wet blending with contrast paints, especially if you didn't use any retarder, which I didn't use. Once contrast paint's dry, you won't be able to get the same blending effect again on that section of the model. I will be doing some more wet blending elsewhere on this figure, so I'll be able to demonstrate. Next, I move on to some detail work to see what the head's going to look like in the end. I am attempting to glaze on some contrast Volpus Pink in the upper eyelids of the figure, but quickly realized that it needed to be thinned. It was going on much too saturated. So I'm mixing some Volpus Pink and Vallejo glaze medium together, loading it up on my brush and then touching a paper towel with the brush to remove most of the paint from the brush. This way, when I apply the paint to the figure, it doesn't gush into all the recesses like a wash. Rather, it evenly coats the area I apply it to with a thin, transparent color tint. I'm applying this tint to the back of the head and to the upper eyelids. This is a rough sketch, and I will be returning to it to refine it later. Getting back to the bulk of the figure, I'm using primarily 3 colors: Plaguebearer Flesh, Creed Camo, and Shyish Purple. That is a yellowish green, a desaturated green, and a dark purple. I'll be wet blending the transitions between the colors. The logic of the colors will be lighter toward the center and darker toward the extremities. So the hands, feet, wings will be Shyish Purple, and the transitional green between Plaguebearer Flesh and the purple will be Creed Camo. As mentioned previously, when wet blending with contrast paints without a retardant, you must work quickly. First, I'm laying down Plaguebearer Flesh, then I'm applying Creed Camo further down the arm without mixing them. Once I have enough Creed Camo on the arm, I will begin blending the colors together without returning to the paint pot, as that would risk contaminating the Creed Camo color. I then repeat this process with the Shyish Purple further on down the hand. Sometimes, when I'm blending, I notice I have applied too much contrast paint and it's overpooling. I remove some of this contrast paint by voiding my brush on a paper towel, then using my brush to soak up some of the paint before voiding it again on the paper towel. Be careful when doing this, because if you remove too much of the contrast paint, it'll be difficult to resaturate the area, especially after you've already blended the colors together. I repeat this blending method for the other hand, both legs, and part of the wings. For the wings, I'm painting all the spines Shyish Purple, and then I will be blending the Shyish Purple with Darkoath Flesh, one of the flesh tones, for the webbing in between the spines. Note that on the webbing here, once I begin blending on the wings, I don't brush the center of the webbing, as that would darken it with the Shyish Purple. Just keep your brush around the edges of the webbing when it is loaded with purple and beige. After that, I had to take a break, so I decided to do some basing, because the product I'm using for the basing takes many hours to dry. I'm using Citadel's Acryl Earth to add some interest to the base. This product produces little cracks and variations. There are many other basing products that would work fine here, including dirt that's been cleaned up. When I came back to it, it was time for finishing touches. I'm making a little Shyish Purple glaze by adding Vallejo Glaze Medium to the Shyish Purple. I'm applying this glaze to the eye sockets. And I'm going back to the Volpus Pink glaze to bring up the saturation on the pink areas on the upper eyelids and on the back of the head. I'm applying the glaze in multiple thin coats. I'm using more coats in areas where I want greater saturation and fewer coats on the edges of the effect, so that it looks like it transitions back into the normal yellow-green skin tone. For the inside of all the sucker-like features on Cthulhu's back, I'm using a bit of Shyish Purple thinned down with glaze medium, and just letting that pool in each little orifice. I was happy with how few different colors I'd used to paint this figure, so I was loath to bust out an opaque red for the eyes, but the eyes really did call for it. So I'm using Acryl's bright Pyrrole Red and a very fine detail brush to define the figure's eyes. Then, to really make them pop, I'm highlighting the eyes with a tiny dot of bright ivory. All that's left is the base and varnishing. For the base, I used a turquoise, Terradon Turquoise, Shyish Purple, and Creed Camo, all blended together with different ratios on different parts of the base. It came out a bit darker than I'd hoped, but I was satisfied enough with it to move on. As this is a game piece, I'm going to be protecting it with several layers of varnish. But the varnish needn't only be for practical purposes. Cthulhu is some sort of sea monster of sorts, so I'm using the varnish to make him look drenched in seawater. For this effect, I applied 2 different varnishes from different angles to produce a variation in the glossiness on the figure. From below, I applied Vallejo gloss varnish, and from above, I applied a 70-30 mixture of matte varnish and gloss varnish to make something of a satin varnish. This makes it look as though Cthulhu has recently stepped out of the sea and the water is dripping down the figure. And this completes Cthulhu. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, like and subscribe. You'll find a list of products to use in the description of the video below. Tune in again soon as we continue painting minis from Cthulhu Death May Die.